My sister paid a stranger to expose me as a fraud at our grandmother's birthday. She wanted me humiliated in front of everyone I love. She never imagined the man she hired had secrets of his own, or that handcuffs would close around the wrong wrists. Before we get back to today's story, I have some exciting news to share. We have officially launched a brand new channel called Tales Beneath Skin. Over there, we are dedicating our platform to bringing you the juiciest, most jaw-dropping Reddit drama stories on the internet. We're diving deep into wild family feuds, shocking relationship betrayals, and epic tales of petty revenge. But we don't just leave you hanging with a cliffhanger. We track down every single update, plot twist, and final resolution so you get the complete, satisfying story from start to finish. Grab your popcorn, because we are serving all the tea with full context, community reactions, and top-tier narration that brings the chaos to life. Make sure to subscribe to Tales Beneath Skin right now so you don't miss out. You'll find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag. Thank you for your continued support as we grow this community. Now, back to the story. The call came at 6:47 in the morning while I was standing barefoot on my kitchen tile waiting for the coffee to finish dripping. I remember the time exactly because I'd been watching the little green digits on the microwave, the way you watch a clock when your body is awake before your mind has agreed to it. I'd been up most of the night reviewing an incident report for a hospital client whose patient records had nearly been breached, and my eyes felt like they'd been rolled in sand. The number on my phone was one I knew but didn't expect. Howard Pell. Howard worked in the licensing and compliance office for the state's department that oversees private investigation and security firms. Over the years, my company had done legitimate digital forensics work that occasionally intersected with licensed investigators, and Howard and I had crossed paths enough times to be on first-name terms. He was not a man who called before 7 in the morning to chat. "Delia," he said, and there was something careful in his voice, the tone of a person trying to figure out how much he's allowed to say. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not read into it until I'm done." That's a terrible way to start a sentence, Howard. Has somebody hired an investigator to look into you, or your company? I laughed because the question was absurd. I'm 34 years old. I built a cybersecurity and digital forensics firm in a converted 2-car garage with a folding table, and a server I assembled myself from parts I couldn't really afford at the time. I've spent 11 years turning that garage operation into a company with 41 employees and contracts that I'm legally not allowed to talk about at dinner parties. I am not a person who gets investigated. I am, on occasion, the person other people hire to do the investigating. Not that I know of, I said. Why? Because somebody pulled your business registration, your incorporation documents, your professional certifications, and a couple of your old vendor filings through a request that came across my desk yesterday. The request was logged under an investigation license number, and the name attached to the file, he paused. I heard papers shift. The name attached as the requesting client is Bryony Marsh Calloway. The coffee maker beeped. I didn't move. Bryony is my sister. My older sister by 4 years. The golden one, the one who stayed in town, the one our mother always described as so easy while describing me as so much. We had not had a real conversation in over a year that didn't end with one of us hanging up. "You still there?" Howard asked. "I'm here." My voice came out flat. "Who's the investigator?" "Guy named Conrad Vance. And Delia, that's the other reason I called. The license number he gave doesn't match the name. It almost does. It's off by 1 digit, and the digit it actually matches belongs to a firm that surrendered its license 18 months ago." He let that sit. Now, that could be a clerical thing. People fat finger numbers all the time, but you and I both know what it can also be. I knew exactly what it could also be. I'd spent a decade learning to read the difference between a typo and a tell. I thanked Howard, told him I owed him lunch, and hung up. Then I stood in my kitchen with cold dread spreading through my chest, because the thing that hurt wasn't that a stranger was digging through my life. I could handle strangers. What hurt was the name on the file. My own sister had paid someone to prove that my entire life was a lie. She didn't want to ask me if I was real. She wanted to prove that I wasn't. I didn't sleep that night either, but for a different reason. I lay in bed running the conversation over and over, and underneath the anger there was a sad, small ache that I recognized from childhood, the ache of being the one nobody quite believed. 2 days later, Bryony called me. That itself was strange. She never called. Our communication had been reduced to family group texts and the occasional clipped voicemail. But there her name was, lighting up my screen on a Thursday evening while I was standing at my stove stirring a pot of soup I had no appetite for. I answered on speaker, kept stirring, because I needed my hands busy. Delia. Her voice was bright in a way that immediately put me on guard. Bryony's brightness was a weather system. You learned to read it for what was coming behind it. I wanted to talk about Grandma's birthday. Grandma Ruth was turning 89 in 9 days. Bryony, being an event planner, had appointed herself the architect of the party. It was going to be at the old family house, with the garden strung in lights, the whole extended family invited, neighbors, Ruth's church friends, the works. Bryony had been telling everyone it would be a celebration she deserves. "What about it?" I asked. "I just want to make sure you're actually coming. You miss things. You're always so busy." The word came out with a little hook in it the way it always did. Busy in Bryony's mouth was a synonym for lying about being busy. "I'll be there. I already told Grandma." "Good, because she's been asking about you. She tells everyone her granddaughter runs some big important company." A pause. The stirring spoon scraped the bottom of the pot. "I'd hate for people to be confused about what you actually do, about what's real." There it was, the cold little blade, slipped in sideways with a smile I could hear but not see. "What's that supposed to mean, Bryony?" "Nothing, I just think it's time some things got cleared up. For Grandma's sake, she shouldn't have to wonder." And then, brightly, like she'd just remembered something pleasant, "Anyway, I'll see you Saturday, don't be late." Click. I stood there with the phone going dark in my hand, soup bubbling, and I realized she was telling me. Not warning me, telling me. She intended to do something at that party. She intended to clear things up in front of everyone. The investigator wasn't to satisfy private curiosity. He was ammunition for a public execution. I went to the cabinet where I keep a few things that came to me when our grandfather passed, and I took out Grandma Ruth's old music box, the hand-cranked one, walnut wood with a brass crank, that she'd let me play with as a child when I was sick or sad. She'd given it to me, not Bryony, and that had always quietly mattered to me. I turned the crank a few times and let the thin, sweet notes spill into the kitchen. I could still hear Ruth's voice, the thing she said every single time I held it as a girl. "That little box always plays true, baby. Doesn't matter what the lid looks like. Doesn't matter how pretty or how plain. What matters is the works inside, and the works inside don't lie." I set the box down and looked at it for a long time. Bryony had hired a man to inspect my lid. She was so busy doubting my surface that it had never occurred to her to wonder about his. The works inside don't lie. I just had to get a good look at his works. To understand why this betrayal hit the way it did, you have to understand what I gave up and who I gave it up for. When our parents divorced, I was 12 and Bryony was 16, and the house split into camps the way houses do. Bryony went with the noise and the drama. I went quiet and inward, and the only person who ever seemed to actually see me in all of it was Grandma Ruth. When my mother was too overwhelmed to drive me to anything, Ruth drove me. When I won the regional science fair with a project on data encryption that nobody in my family understood or attended, Ruth was the one sitting in the second row in her good coat, clapping like I'd cured something. So when I started my company at 23, broke and stubborn and sleeping on a cot in that garage, the person I called when I wanted to quit was Ruth. She mailed me $20 bills folded into birthday cards that weren't for any birthday. "For coffee," she'd write. Keep going. I kept going partly because I could not bear to let that woman down. And here is the part that twists the knife. 3 years ago, when Bryony's event planning business hit a rough patch and she was about to lose her lease, I quietly paid 6 months of her commercial rent. through an intermediary, anonymously, because I knew she'd never accept it from me. She never found out it was me. She told the whole family she'd figured it out herself, that her business was thriving. I let her have that. I have never once corrected the record. I have never told a single soul. Until now, telling you. That is the sister who hired a man to prove I was a fraud. I think now that she'd been telling herself a story for years, that my success couldn't be real, because if it was real, then the daughter everyone called so easy had been outrun by the daughter everyone called so much. It was easier for her to believe I was lying than to believe I had simply done it. The man she chose to prove it was named Conrad Vance, and I met him 4 days before the party, by design. I'd had Marisol, my head of operations and the closest thing I have to a sister who actually behaves like one, reach out to Vance Investigative Solutions under a fake name, posing as a small business owner who wanted a partner vetted. I wanted to see him operate. He agreed to meet at a coffee shop. I sat 2 tables away, sunglasses on, scrolling my phone like any other woman on a Tuesday, while Marisol took the meeting. Conrad Vance was somewhere in his late 40s, with a tan that didn't match the season and a suit that was nicer than the diner booth it sat in. He was charming in the rehearsed way of a man who has practiced charm in a mirror. He name-dropped constantly, a contact at the bureau, a buddy at the courthouse, cases he couldn't discuss but heavily implied. It was a performance, and to most people it would have been a convincing one. But I have spent my entire adult life around real investigators, real forensic analysts, real law enforcement. And the more Conrad talked, the more wrong he sounded. He used the phrase deep database access twice, which is not a thing any legitimate licensed investigator would ever say, because there is no magic deep database. There are court records, public filings, and credentialed requests, all of which are logged. Then he made his real mistake. Telling Marisol how thorough he was, he said, "I already did a job like this recently, pulled a woman's whole corporate history, certifications, the works. Tech company. Founder thinks nobody can touch her." Tech company, founder. He was describing me to a woman he didn't know worked for me, bragging about it like a trophy. I sat very still behind my sunglasses and felt the fear drain out and something colder and steadier take its place. He'd told me everything. His license was wrong. His vocabulary was wrong. His discretion was non-existent. And he had just confirmed, out of his own mouth, that the job was about me. Bryony hadn't hired a professional. She'd hired a counterfeit, and she had no idea. That night, I stopped being a woman who'd been wronged and became a woman with a project. I want to be honest about the shift, because it matters. For 3 days, I had been carrying this thing like a wound, the hurt of my sister's doubt, the dread of public humiliation, the old childhood ache of being the one nobody believed. And those feelings were real, and I didn't pretend they weren't. But somewhere between the coffee shop and my own front door, the wound closed over into resolve. I do this for a living. Not the revenge part, the finding out part. Bryony had walked onto my field and didn't even know there was a field. I called Marisol the second I got home. "Tell me you got it," I said. "I got all of it." Marisol had recorded the entire meeting on the consultation form she'd had him sign, which, by the laws of our state, made the recording perfectly lawful, since she was a party to the conversation, and we were nowhere that carried an expectation of privacy. She'd also kept every text and email he'd sent, the proposal he'd attached, and a photo of his business card. "Delia, this guy is a clown. He spelled surveillance wrong on his own proposal. I don't care about his spelling, I care about his license." Here's the thing Bryony never understood about what I actually do. People assume cybersecurity means I sit in a dark room typing furiously while green code rains down a screen. It doesn't. A huge part of my world is verification, proving that a person, a credential, a document, or a transaction is genuinely what it claims to be. I spend my days separating the authentic from the counterfeit. And the irony so sharp it could draw blood was this. My sister had hired a man whose entire scheme depended on no one having the skill to check him, and she'd aimed him at the one person in the family who checks things for a living. I started with the license number Howard had flagged. Investigator licenses in our state are public record. Anyone can verify them through the regulatory portal. Conrad's number, the real one on his card, didn't return Conrad Vance at all. It returned a different name entirely, a man whose license had been suspended. The number Conrad had given Bryony in his contract, the one logged on the record's request, was the off-by-one-digit Howard mentioned. It belonged to that defunct firm that had surrendered its license a year and a half earlier. In plain English, Conrad Vance was not a licensed private investigator. He was operating under a number that wasn't his, attached to a firm that no longer existed, while charging clients for investigations he had no legal authority to conduct. Then I did the thing I'm genuinely good at. I built him. I pulled his online footprint, every layer of it. Vance Investigative Solutions had a website that was 4 months old. The professional headshots on the Our Team page were stock photos. I ran a reverse image search and found the same smiling, senior investigators selling dental insurance on 3 other websites. The testimonials were from accounts that had been created the same week. His 15 years of law enforcement experience had no corresponding record anywhere. And believe me, that kind of record leaves footprints. But the name Conrad Vance itself was where it got interesting, because it was almost certainly not his only one. I cross-referenced the photo from his business card against public court records and news archives, and slowly, piece by piece, a different shape emerged. A man with his face and a slightly different name had been named in a civil fraud judgment 2 states over. A man with his face and yet another name was mentioned in a local news story about a fake security consultant who had bilked elderly homeowners out of deposits for monitoring systems he never installed. By 2 in the morning, I had a folder. A real one, sourced, dated, every claim backed by a document a person could hold in their hands. I sat back and looked at it, and Grandma Ruth's voice drifted up from somewhere in my memory. The works inside don't lie. I'd finally gotten a look at his works. There was almost nothing in there but air and other people's photographs. I should have felt triumphant. Mostly I felt tired and sad and aware that the hardest part wasn't going to be exposing Conrad. The hardest part was going to be my sister. I went to see Bryony 2 days before the party. Not to fight, to give her a chance, one chance that she absolutely did not deserve and that I gave her anyway because she's my sister and because of Grandma Ruth. She opened the door of her townhouse with that bright, brittle smile, the weather system, and I could see in the first half-second that she thought I was there to beg. To plead with her not to do whatever she was planning. The smile of a person who believes they hold all the cards. "Delia, this is a surprise. Can I come in 5 minutes?" She let me into her living room, which was beautiful and staged the way event planners' homes always are, and didn't offer me anything to sit on, which was its own message. I stayed standing. "I know about Conrad Vance," I said. Her face did a complicated thing. First a flicker of surprise, then a smoothing over, then a defensive lift of the chin. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You hired him to investigate me, to prove I've been lying about my company, and you're planning to spring whatever he gives you at Grandma's party in front of everyone." I kept my voice level. "Bryony, I'm not here to ask you not to. I'm here to tell you the man you hired is a fraud." And here it came, the lashing out. She laughed, a sharp, ugly little sound. "Of course you'd say that. The second someone actually looks into you, suddenly they're the liar." She crossed her arms. "He warned me you'd do this. He said people with something to hide always try to discredit the investigator. I want you to sit with how perfect that is. The con man's oldest trick, inoculating his mark against the truth in advance so that when the truth arrives it sounds like the lie. He'd told her, she'll attack me, that's how you'll know I'm getting close. And she'd swallowed it whole because she wanted to. She'd wanted me to be a fraud for so long that a man who promised to prove it could have told her the sky was a rug and she'd have rolled it up. "His license number is fake," I said quietly. "It belongs to a firm that closed 18 months ago. The real number on his card belongs to a suspended investigator with a different name. His website uses stock photos. His testimonials are from accounts made the same day. And his face shows up in a fraud judgment and a news story about a man who scams older people." I held out a single sheet of paper. Just one. I wasn't going to dump the whole folder on her doorstep. Start with this. Then go verify it yourself. You don't have to take my word for any of it. Everything on that page you can check independently in 20 minutes. She didn't take the paper. She looked at it like it might bite. You're unbelievable, she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge, and her eyes kept dropping to the sheet. You'll do anything. You'll fake anything to keep this up. Then check it, I said. If I'm faking, you'll catch me. Isn't that the whole point of what you hired him for, to catch me? I set the paper on her staged coffee table. You hired a man to find the truth, Bryony. I'm just handing it to you for free. I left. I didn't slam the door. As I walked to my car, I glanced back through the window and saw her standing exactly where I'd left her, the single sheet of paper now in her hands. She was reading it. I'd love to tell you that one sheet of paper fixed everything. It didn't. What it did was make Conrad nervous, because Bryony, to her limited credit, called him. I know this because of what happened next, which I only pieced together fully afterward. She called him and repeated some of what I'd said, probably to be reassured, probably half hoping he'd laugh it off so she could keep her story intact. And Conrad, sensing the ground shifting, did what cornered con men do. He escalated. He called me Ms. Marsh. Smooth, warm, the mirror practice charm. I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd hate for it to spoil your grandmother's celebration. I'm a professional. I have no interest in family squabbles. Perhaps we could meet, clear the air. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that makes everyone comfortable. An arrangement. He was offering, in the gentlest possible language, to take money from me to make his investigation disappear, having already taken money from my sister to create it. He was trying to play both daughters against the middle. It was almost impressive, in the way a particularly bold pickpocket is almost impressive. That's a generous offer, I said. Let me think about it. And I let him believe I might pay, because a man who thinks he's about to get paid stays exactly where you can see him. Meanwhile, I did two things. The first was that I took my folder, the real one, complete, and I did what I should have trusted myself to do from the start. I contacted Howard Pell formally and filed a complaint with the licensing board for unlicensed investigative activity, attaching the documentation. Then, because the pattern I'd uncovered crossed state lines and involved what looked like ongoing fraud against multiple victims, I forwarded the relevant findings to a contact in the state's Consumer Fraud Enforcement Unit, a connection I had precisely because my legitimate work occasionally surfaces exactly this kind of thing. I wasn't playing detective in the dark. I was routing real evidence to the people whose actual job it is to act on it. What came back over the next 36 hours turned my stomach. Conrad Vance, real name, it turned out, Gerald Conroy, had outstanding warrants. Not just civil judgments. Active arrest warrants in 2 jurisdictions for fraud and impersonation. He had a documented history of posing as an investigator or a security consultant specifically to extract money from people, and, in at least one case, to intimidate a woman during a family inheritance dispute. He targeted families in conflict because families in conflict are full of people who want to believe the worst about each other and will pay to have it confirmed. Bryony hadn't found him by accident. He found people like her. She was the mark. She just thought she was the client. The second thing I did was the hardest. I went to see Grandma Ruth. I drove out to the old house the day before her party, while Bryony was off managing the caterer, and I sat with my grandmother at her kitchen table, and I told her the truth. All of it. Not to recruit her against Bryony, I made that clear. But because Ruth deserved to walk into her own birthday party knowing what was happening under her own roof, rather than being a prop in someone else's ambush. She listened the whole way through, those sharp 88-year-old eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and put her papery hand on mine. "You remember what I told you about that music box," she said. "The works inside don't lie." "That's right." She patted my hand once firmly. "Your sister's been looking at the wrong lids her whole life, baby, always so worried about how the box looked. never once cracked it open to listen. She straightened in her chair, and something steely came into her. You let tomorrow happen the way it's going to happen. I'm 89. I have earned the right to see a thing through to the truth, and I'd like, just once, to watch the works prove themselves. I hadn't told her that the Consumer Fraud Unit had quietly indicated that, given the active warrants, Conrad Vance, attending a public advertised event, might be of professional interest to them. I hadn't told her that, but somehow, looking at her, I think she already knew the works were about to play. The party was beautiful. I'll give Bryony that. The garden behind the old family house glowed with strings of warm light threaded through the maple trees, and there were round tables with white cloths, and a long banquet table heavy with food, and a banner that read Happy 89th, Ruth in hand-lettered gold. 40-50 people drifted across the lawn, cousins, neighbors, Ruth's church friends in their good dresses, a few of her old students from when she taught grade school 60 years ago. My grandmother sat in a wicker chair like a throne, holding court, radiant. I arrived on time in a simple navy dress, carrying my grandmother's gift wrapped in plain brown paper. I debated bringing the folder and decided against it. I didn't need to bring anything. The works were going to play on their own. Bryony spotted me within a minute. She was in event planner mode, headset and clipboard, but her eyes found me across the lawn, and there was a tightness in them I'd never seen before. She'd read the page. She'd maybe even check some of it. But she'd committed to her plan, and people who have committed to a plan will sometimes drive it straight off a cliff rather than admit they took a wrong turn. I understood, watching her, that she was going to go through with it anyway. Some part of her still needed me to be the liar more than she needed to be safe. And there, beside the bar, in a suit too sharp for a backyard birthday, stood Conrad Vance. Gerald Conroy. Holding a leather folio, smiling that mirror smile, working the small crowd, introducing himself as a family friend. He caught my eye and gave me a small, confident nod, the nod of a man who still thought I might pay him, who still thought he held cards. After the cake, after the singing, after Ruth had blown out a single symbolic candle because 89 would have been a fire hazard, Bryony tapped her glass. Everyone, can I have your attention? I want to say something about family, about honesty in a family. Her voice was bright and shaking at the edges. Heads turned. We all love Grandma Ruth, and we all want what's best for her. And sometimes that means making sure the people around her are who they say they are. Her eyes cut to me. My sister Delia tells a wonderful story about her big, important company. And tonight, I've asked a professional investigator to help us understand what's actually true. Conrad. The smile, the step forward, the folio opening. Thank you, Bryony, folks, I'll keep this brief. He didn't keep it brief, because he never got the chance to start. Two people came around the side of the house and onto the lawn, a man and a woman, unremarkable in plain clothes, except for the way they moved, which was the way people move when they have somewhere specific to be and authority to be there. The crowd's heads turned again, confused. Conrad's smile flickered. I watched it happen in real time, the precise instant a con man recognizes that the dynamic in a room has changed and he is no longer the one steering it. Gerald Conroy. The woman said. She held up a badge. The lawn went very, very quiet. I think you have the wrong, he started. Gerald Conroy, also known as Conrad Vance, the man was already moving. We have warrants for your arrest for fraud and criminal impersonation. Put the folder down, please, hands where I can see them. I have replayed the next 30 seconds many times. The folio hitting the grass, papers fanning out across the lawn, and they were nonsense, I saw later, printouts of my entirely public business registration dressed up to look damning, the evidence Bryony had paid for. The handcuffs, dull silver in the warm party lights, closing around the wrists of the man who'd come to humiliate me. Conrad's charm finally, completely gone, replaced by the flat, cornered face of who he actually was underneath the suit. And Bryony. Bryony standing frozen with her glass still half raised, her clipboard slack at her side, the whole architecture of her plan collapsing in front of everyone she'd invited to watch me collapse. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just stood there beside my grandmother's chair while the works played themselves, loud and true, in front of the entire family. It was Ruth who spoke. Into the stunned silence, in her clear old school teacher's voice that had quieted classrooms for 30 years, she said, "Well, I suppose now we know whose story didn't hold up." She was looking at Bryony when she said it, and then she reached up, found my hand, and held it. Gerald Conroy was led off the lawn and into the back of a car parked discreetly at the curb. He is, as of this writing, facing prosecution in 2 states. The fraud and impersonation warrants were only the beginning. Once his arrest made the local news, 3 other families he'd worked the same con on came forward, including the woman from the inheritance dispute. The fake Vance Investigative Solutions website went dark within a week. The man who built a career out of being believed will spend a long time somewhere that no one believes a thing he says, and I find I have no sympathy left over for him at all. The harder reckoning was Bryony's, and it didn't come with handcuffs. It came slower, and in some ways it was worse. The story moved through the family the way these stories do, and through her professional circle not long after, because 2 of her event planning clients had been guests on that lawn. The woman who'd built her brand on competence and good taste had stood in front of 50 people and tried to destroy her own sister using a con artist she'd paid out of her own pocket. People didn't shout at her. They just got quietly, permanently cooler. Invitations stopped. A referral or 2 dried up. The social warmth she'd spent her whole life cultivating simply withdrew, an inch at a time, until she was standing in the cold she'd tried to push me into. She didn't apologize for a long time. Months. And when she finally did, it wasn't grand. She showed up at my office one afternoon, my real office, with the 41 employees and the locked rooms full of work I can't discuss, and she stood in the lobby looking around at all of it, at the undeniable, physical, real fact of it, and something in her face just gave way. We went for coffee. She didn't make excuses, which surprised me. She said, "I needed you to be lying, because if you weren't, then I'd wasted a lot of years being angry at the wrong thing." She turned her cup in her hands. "I think I've been looking at the wrong part of you my whole life." I thought of the music box. I didn't tell her about the 6 months of rent. I still haven't. Some truths you keep not because the other person doesn't deserve them, but because you've decided who you want to be, and I didn't want to be the person who finally wielded that one. We're not close. Bryony and I don't know if we ever will be. But we talk now, carefully, like 2 people learning a new language, and that's more than we had. The reconciliation that actually healed something was with Ruth. She turned 90 this year. I drove out and sat with her at the kitchen table, and she had the second music box, the one she'd kept, and we cranked them both at once and let the 2 thin melodies tangle in the air. "You did right," she told me. "You didn't burn the house down. You just opened the box and let everybody hear." She squeezed my hand with that papery grip. That's the harder thing. Anybody can make a fire. Takes a stronger person to make a thing play true. I think about that more than I expected to. My sister hired a stranger to prove I was nothing. What she actually proved, in front of everyone, was the one thing she'd never been able to accept, that some things don't need defending. They only need to be opened up and heard. The works inside don't lie. Mine never did.